This is October 23rd, 2022. My name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Sunday school, Bible school. Um, I have to text my friend and say, hey, you should watch the Bible study. John, you should watch my Bible study. Okay. Anyway, we're in the book of Exodus. We're in Exodus chapter 15. The children of Israel have just been uh, freed from Egypt. They've just crossed the Red Sea and they've seen that Pharaoh's army was chasing them. It's an impossible situation. It's impossible. Mountains on either side. Pharaoh's army is behind them with horses and chariots. They've got their kids and their livestock. The sea's in front of them. So God seems to have brought them to this place where it's going to take some sort of miracle. And it does. And God did that on purpose. And that's part of the message today, that sometimes God brings us to a place where it would take a miracle. I'm thinking, why did God let this happen? He says, because I want to do a miracle. Because I want to do a miracle. I want people to go, that had to have been God. There's no way that that could have, right? Because we love to think that things are happening for just whatever reason. Oh, that was a coincidence. And that, so God sometimes likes to, let's see if I could bring that over. What happens? Does it move? Yes. So God would like to sometimes do something phenomenal and let the situation just get crazy, and then a miracle happens. So that you say, okay, that had to have been God. He'd like to get credit for things. That's just how he is. God is a glory hog. He wants the glory. So they go over and, oh, thank goodness. They go over to the other side. They turn, the waters close in on Pharaoh and his armies. And Moses writes a song. Happy days are here again. And that's what Exodus chapter 15 is, the song of Moses. Although he wrote another one in Deuteronomy. Because he says, hey, I've got a hit going. Let me get a flip side to that album. Of course, kids today don't know what I'm talking about. Flip side to an album. What are you talking about? Anyway, so he writes this song. We're going to go through it because he recounts, and it's in basically 3 or 4 sections where he recounts. He first introduces the main character of the song, which is God. Then he what's he do? Then he talks about the mighty acts that he's done. Then he talks about how incomparable he is to anybody else. And then he talks about the impact of what God has done. So, Exodus chapter 15, I'm going to go through fast if I can. But just starting at the end of Exodus chapter 14, it says, so the Lord saved Israel that day. Exodus chapter 14, verse 30. The Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. So the water covers them over, and eventually, a couple days later, it wasn't instant, their bodies float back up because you die and your body decomposes and it's full of gas, and so it rises and it's floating on the water, and their bodies eventually brushed up against the seashore. So Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. So they feared him and believed him. God's goal. And then Moses and children of Israel sang this song to the Lord. Now, the same song happens in Revelation chapter. No, it's not. This song is referenced in Revelation chapter 15. But I don't have time for that. So he sings this song, Exodus chapter 15. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. And they're all going to sing this song. The Lord is my strength, in song, verse 2. He has become my salvation. He is my God. I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. Now we're just going to pause there. He's my father's God. They didn't have a personal relationship with God. Do you have a personal relationship with God? They didn't have a personal relationship with this God. They've been in Egypt for 200 years, learning about Egypt's gods, and everything they knew about God was just rumor. They didn't build any altars to God while they were there. There was no temple. They just laid bricks every day and went home and slept. But they'd heard about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he's our father's God, really. We're just having to meet him, which is why God's bringing them out into the wilderness to introduce himself to them. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 5, it says, Then he said, this is God talking to Moses, do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, because your sandals have touched the world, and you're standing in holy ground, and anything that touched the world, I want off your feet, right? So that you get the sense that you're standing on something that's sacred. The place where you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. So no one had had a personal encounter for 200 and something years with God. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had a personal encounter. Now Moses, God is purposely not having a personal encounter with them while they're in Egypt, because then they'd really want to stay. He already had trouble getting them to leave. And they always wanted to go back. Like, Egypt was so good, because we forget how bad things were. We forget how bad things were, and we romanticize them in our heads, but things were horrible. So he's certainly not going to appear to them in Egypt, because, well, you appeared to us in Egypt. Why can't we just stay in Egypt? Mm-mm. He appears to Moses and says, basically, you'll hear my voice again once you get back to this mountain, which is where God is leading them back to this mountain. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 14, he said to Abraham, know certainly that your descendants will be stranger in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, they will afflict them 400 years. It was 400 years from the time that he said this to Abraham until he led them out. And also, so he said, like, total 400 years from the time I'm talking to you now until your children come back. He says, also the nation whom they serve I will judge, and then afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. Right back here. Okay. So he personally said this to Abraham. Isaac, although God was Isaac's God, Isaac always had a funny relationship with God, because his memory of God is, I was sitting on this altar and my dad had a knife raised like he was going to kill me. And so God has always been spooky to him. But he has a relationship with Jacob. So he tells Jacob in Genesis 46:4, I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eye. So I'm going to go down with it, but I'll bring you up. And he's really talking about, I'll bring you and your people. And Joseph will, when somebody is passed away, their relative closes their eyes. He says, Joseph will put his hand on your eye. So you're going to see Joseph again, and he, in fact, will be there at your bedside. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 37 says, and because he loved your fathers, therefore he chose their descendants after them, and he brought you out of Egypt with his presence, with his mighty power. So they're pretty clear. God made this promise to our fathers, and now he's bringing it to pass. But they didn't know him personally, but he's going to introduce himself as, I'm the God who keeps his promises. So how do you do? Get to know you now. But it's because of what I said to your fathers that you're here, and that's what they're acknowledging in this song. Verse 3, the Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. So this is the introduction. Who is this man? Now here's what he did, the acts of God. Verse 4, Pharaoh's chariots and his army he cast into the sea. His chosen captains are also drowned in the Red Sea. The depths have covered them. They sank to the bottom like a stone. And then later they rose back up. Your right hand, O Lord, has become glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, has dashed the enemy in pieces. And in the greatness of your excellence, you have overthrown those who rose against you. You sent forth your wrath. It consumed them like stubble. So here's everything that you did. And this is a song. And with the blast of your nostrils, the waters were gathered together. The flood stood upright like a heap, right? So you breathed, split the waters into, the depths congealed, so they solidified. And this is just metaphor. The water didn't become solid like rock, but he's saying it They became solid enough that they stood there like jelly, like jello. The depths congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, "Oh, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall be satisfied on them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them." This is everything that Pharaoh's saying behind them. But you blew with your wind, and the sea covered them, and they sank like lead in the mighty waters. Okay, now, next section. He's the incomparable God. And there's no one like him. So here's everything he did. And guess what? No one else can do that. Verse 11, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? Uh, my friends wrote a song to this particular scripture. It just went through my mind just now. 12, you stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. You in your mercy have led forth the people whom you have redeemed. So you've redeemed us, you've ransomed us, you paid the price so that we can come out. You have guided them in your strength to your holy habitation. Now, here's where I'm slowing down and spending more time, is the impact. So, because God doesn't just do things for fun, he knows, here are the ramifications, here are the consequences, here's going to be in the impact. So I've allowed this situation to seem horrible. And sometimes we think, well, God must have abandoned us to let the situation get this bad. When really, he's right there letting it get like that so that you have a story to tell later. We look at the circumstances and everybody to pray. Like, this is, God's going to have a hard time with this one. And it's the opposite. God's like, oh, yeah, let it get really, yeah, let it all close in. Okay, oh, the doctor said you're going to have to quadruple bypass. And yes. Of course, God didn't tell you to eat like you ate in order, but he's letting the situation get to that. And then you get to tell the story months later. Yes, and the doctors came in and it was even worse than they thought. And look what God did. And then there's an impact on others who hear that, right? So here's the impact. The people will hear and be afraid. The people where you're going once I bring you out, the people in the wilderness who live on the east side of the Jordan, and then the people on the west side of the Jordan, they're going to hear. They will be afraid. Sorrow will take hold of the inhabitants of Philistia. And he's going to list Philistia and Edom and Moab and these places where they went and just say, here's the impact because you're believing my word. Well, ironically, this did not happen because they didn't believe God's word. Yes, they went across the Red Sea, but let's see what happened with Philistia, for example. So in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 6 through 8, and you know the story, but I need you to hear this version of it. It says, the Lord our God spoke to us in Horeb. That's the name of Mount Sinai. So it's called Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai, depending on which culture is calling it what, right? Because the Israelites didn't own that mountain. They named it one thing, but the people who lived there named it something different. The Sinai Peninsula is what the Arabs had called it. They called it Mount Horeb. So the Lord God spoke to us once he gave him the Ten Commandments on Mount Horeb. This is Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 6. You have dwelt long enough at this mountain. Verse 7. Turn and take your journey. Go to the mountains of the Amorites, to all the neighboring places in the plain. So, because that's where they were supposed to enter the promised land. Go up to where the Amorites are and then go across the Jordan, and you're going to go in to all the neighboring places of the plain, in the mountains and in the lowlands in the south. So you're going to go through the Amorites and just go in and take the land of Canaan. The lowland in the south, on the sea coast, to the land of the Canaanites, and to Lebanon as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. So you're just going to inhabit this whole land and just spread out. But I'm taking you north. They are northeast. The Philistines are southwest. I'm taking you as far as possible from the Philistines. So as you invade this land, you'll get more confidence and more confidence as you conquer Jericho, as you conquer Ai, which is spelled Ai, and all these different places. So by the time you get to Philistia, you will have so much confidence. They were supposed to go through the south up, like Egypt is here, and Philistia is right above it, north of it, and the short route would have just been to go straight up through the Philistines, through Philistia, but that would have freaked them out. That's why God took them this whole other route around, so that they came from the northeast, and then went south. Uh, because he wanted to build up their confidence. Do not start with Philistia, you'll be very upset, and then you will chicken out. And again, God gives us our free will. So there are paths that he takes us on that we think, why did you take me in this path? And why did, because you would have freaked out the other way. So yeah, I went the long path for you so that you won't give up. It took so long. Yeah, because if you had met that person 10 years ago, you would have killed them. So I'm going to wait 10 years for you to meet this person. So they've got it more together so that you realize, oh, I should partner with this person. Right. So God knows how we're going to freak out and manages us. So he says, go through the land of the Amorites, then come down, then head south, fill the whole land. Verse 8, see, I've set the land before you. Go in, possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to them and their descendants after them. Go in. I just gave you 10 commandments. Go. He didn't say have a meeting about it. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 20. And I said to you, you've come to the mountains of the Amorites. So here we are, the mountains of the Amorites, ready to go in, which the Lord our God is giving us. Look, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Go up, possess it, as the Lord your God of your fathers has spoken to you. Don't be afraid, do not be discouraged. Let's just go. And verse 22 says, and every one of you came near to me and said, let us send men before us. Let them search out the land for us and bring back word to us by the way which we should go up and of the cities into which we shall come. Now, God already told them, do this first and that first and go to Mount. He already given them the plan. We don't know if we trust God's plan. Let's send a committee. So, problem, right? They're already not obeying God. And in Numbers chapter 13 says how they went down, they went south. Verse 22 says, and they went up through the south and came to Hebron. They went to Achiman, Sheshai, Talmai. These are all the Philistine cities. The descendants of Anak were there. The giants were there. So that became a problem. And that's how if they had done it the way God told them to do it, they would have gone in as conquerors. They would have built confidence. And by the time they got south, then they said, we can take these giants because we've just won 10 battles in a row. So we know God can. But since they decided to check out that land first, they spooked themselves, discouraged themselves, and didn't go in. So now they're stuck on the east side of the Jordan in this Arabian Peninsula for the next 40 years. So God, when they sing this song, when Moses sings this song, when they first cross the Red Sea, he says the chiefs of Edom will be dismayed, because that's what would have happened had they first come out of Egypt and the pharaohs. Then Edom, who are their cousins, would have went, oh no, here they come. Once they chickened out and decided not to go back to the land of Canaan, and they look stupid to everybody on the on the east side of the Jordan. They look dumb. Everybody on the east side saw them go up to the land and then retreat and run back. It's like, well, we're not scared of these people. They would have been had they just crossed on over and started conquering people. The people on the west side of the Jordan, they have no idea that they've chickened out. They don't know what happened. So on the west side of the Jordan, they had like, oh, are they coming? And they have a chance to make up stories about them and all the things they must be doing on the other side of the Jordan. But the people on the east side of the Jordan, they know that they just chickened out. They know. So they're no longer afraid of them. So it says, the chiefs of Edom will be dismayed. Well, here's what happened when they ran into Edom. And Numbers chapter 20, verse 14. And this is just a little while after they chickened out. Verse 14 says, now Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel. Again, they're cousins, because Edom is the descendants of Esau, and these are the children of Jacob, children of Israel, right? So Esau and Jacob were brothers, and so their descendants are cousins, second cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins. We're your cousins, but he's used the word brother. Direct. This is their closest descendants. Thus says your brother, Israel, you know all the hardships that has befallen us and how our fathers went down to Egypt and we dwelt in Egypt a long time and the Egyptians afflicted us and our father. You know that whole story, how we went because one brother stayed and one brother went down to Egypt. So you know what happened. Uh, and when we cried out to the Lord, he heard our voice and he sent the angel and brought us up out of Egypt. And now here we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of your border, because they want to go back. Like they came to the mountain, they chickened out, and now can we just kind of go? It'd be easier if we went through your border in order to find a nice place. And so we're here at Kadesh, and please just let us pass through your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards. Now there's 100,000 people. And that's a lot like, oh, I don't know if I want them trapping on all my fields and stuff like that. He says, we won't. We won't go through your fields or vineyards, nor will we drink water from your wells. We will go along the King's Highway, this little highway around the border there. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory. And then Edom said to him, no, you shall not pass through my land, lest I come out against you with the sword. So the children of Israel said to him, well, we would go by the highway. We're not really passing through your land. We're going by the highway. And if I or my livestock are drinking any of your water, then I'll pay for it. Then let me only pass through on foot, nothing more. And then he said, no, you shall not pass through. So Edom came out against them with many men and with a strong hand. Now, when he sang the song, the chiefs of Edom will be dismayed. They were not dismayed. But that song was conditional on if you go on through, then the people of Edom will be impressed and dismayed. And if you chicken out and don't do what I said, then these people are not going to be afraid of you. And they weren't. So the song is, they're all excited. And this is about the Lord's timing, because there's a time when God's saying to do something, and there's a certain result that will happen if you do it when God says it. Now, the good news is God's still going to have you do it, but it's going to be harder on you because you should have done it when God told you to do it. But it's okay. It's still going to happen. But Edom's going to go, I'm not that impressed with you. So, okay. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 3. Now, this is 38 years later when God is now bringing them back. And they're going to go through Edom. And here's what he's saying in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 3. And the Lord spoke to me. So Deuteronomy chapter 1 is when they first, because they're summing everything up. By the way, so the book of Exodus obviously is about when they leave and go to the mountain and get the 10 commandments. Leviticus happens while they're on the mountain, and he's giving the charge to the priests, to the Levites, and saying, this is all the rules you need to follow once you get over into the promised land. The book of Numbers is their journey where they're supposed to go over the promised land, but they don't. And in the book of Numbers, the whole book is like, and so here's all the crappy stuff that happened to us for 40 years while we were stuck because we were stupid and didn't go over. Deuteronomy sums that up. It's like, let's sum it all up, but I'm going to sum it all up in chapter 1. Chapter 2, I'm going to tell you the journey that happens once we finally decided to go. So Deuteronomy chapter, the book of Deuteronomy is like that last year and a half when God finally said, okay, you can go now. And I'll take you back up there. It'll take about a year and a half to get there. And then you can go ahead and cross over the Jordan. And so these are your final instructions now that you're finally ready. So the book of Numbers is the first 38 years. The book of Deuteronomy is the last couple years. So in Deuteronomy chapter 2, they're ready to go back. Finally. And the Lord spoke to me saying, you have skirted this mountain long enough. You've gone all around Kadesh and where I wanted you to go through where the Amorites are. Okay, time's up. Turn northward. So now you go back up north and you're going to go back through and command the people saying, you're about to pass through the territory of your brethren, the descendants of Esau. These are the same Edomites, right? Who live in Seir, and they will be afraid of you now because you're finally doing what I asked you to do. What happened during these 38 years, I let you win some battles and you beat this person, that person. And so now they're afraid of you again, which they would have been had you gone the first time. So we're not screwed over when we don't do things in God's timing. Oh no, now we messed up, and the 40 years later, I've recreated those conditions. So they are now afraid of you again. So he says, command the people, saying, you're about to pass through the territory of your brother, the descendants of Esau who live in Seir, and they will be afraid of you. Therefore, watch yourself carefully. Do not meddle with them. Like, you don't bother them. Just know they're afraid of you, so don't bother them. For I will not give you any of their land. No, not so much as one footstep, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as his possession. That belongs to him. So don't. I know the king came after you, and this king came after you, and you had to fight them. Don't bother your cousins, okay? Had you just done what I said, this is how it would have been 40 years ago. Verse 9, then the Lord said to me, do not harass Moab, nor contend with them in battle. So don't bother Moab, even though they live on the east side of the Jordan. Don't bother them, for I will give you any of their land as a possession, because I've given Ar, which is a city in Moab, to the descendants of Lot as a possession. So you've got Esau's family or Edom, Lot's descendants, Abraham's nephew. Those are the Moabites. Well, how did that happen? Because the next verse that Moses sings in his song is how the king, Edom will be afraid. Then he says, the mighty men of Moab, they'll be trembling. And so God's listing, the Edomites will be afraid of you. The Moabites will be afraid of you. This person will be afraid of you. All these people will be afraid of you. Had you just gone straight through. For the next 38 years, they were not afraid of them. Until they defeated some kings right at the end, and now they're afraid again. So God's recreated those conditions. Who are the Moabites? If you remember in Genesis chapter 19, when Lot and his family came out of Sodom, God rescued Lot and his wife and his 2 daughters. They went up into the mountain. Instead of going back to Abraham, because they're in a valley. On the west side is Abraham. On the east side are people that Lot does not know. He's so embarrassed. He should have gone back to his uncle Abraham, but he's embarrassed. So he goes to these people he doesn't know, and then he's scared of them. So they live in caves. Now the daughters, they've never seen those people. Lot saw them before he moved down to Sodom. Daughters, they don't know. They don't think anybody. They tell their father. They tell each other, there are no men left on the earth, because everything they knew had just gotten destroyed. So they thought God blew everything up. We're going to be we're the last 2 women left on earth, and there are no more men left on earth. So they get their father drunk. They have sex with their father because they think it's our job to keep the species going. In Genesis chapter 19, verse 36, it says, thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. And the first bore a son and called his name Moab. So these are descendants of Moab, and they're living on the east side of the Jordan. And he's the father of the Moabites to this day. So God's tolerating this and says, okay, I'm giving Lot's descendants this land. When you guys go back through, don't bother the Moabites. They would have been afraid of you 40 years ago. Don't worry. For 38 years, they were not afraid of you. I don't know if you remember in Numbers chapter 22, verse 3, at the beginning of that 40-year period, once the Israelites said, no, we're not going to go into the promised land. We're too scared. The Moabites are looking at them. In Numbers chapter 22, verse 3, it says, and Moab was exceedingly afraid of the people because there were many. Like, what are all these people going to do? There's a couple 100,000 people. And Moab was sick with dread because of the children of Israel. And in this case, because there's just too many of them. So Moab said to the elders of Midian, now this company will lick up everything around us. The elders of Midian. Who's Midian? Abraham had 2 wives. He had Sarah. Sarah passed. He married another woman, and one of their sons was named Midian. And so the Midianites are also cousins. So Lot knows the Midianites, and Lot's kids, the Moabites, go to the Midianites and say, we need help. So Moab said to the elders of Midian, now this company is going to look up everything around us as an ox licks up the grass of the field. Like, there's a couple 100,000 people who are suddenly moving in next door. Can't have it. And Balak, the son of Zippor, was king of the Moabites at that time. So we know Balak. And then he sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, Pethor, which is near the river, the land of the sons of the people, to call to him, saying, Look, a people has come from Egypt. See, they cover the face of the earth and are settling next to me. So they weren't supposed to do that. Had they just gone on over and crossed the Jordan and hadn't sent out spies to make sure God knew what he was talking about, they wouldn't have this problem. But since they refused to go over, now they're stuck, and there's not enough land suddenly for 100,000 people to show up. So you know how Balak tormented them, and well, he tried to. He tried to get Balaam to torment them, and Balaam refused. But it's like a problem. So God's saying, now that you're on your way out, don't bother them. Now that you're on your way out, don't bother the Edomites, don't bother the Moabites. They were afraid of you, but you were supposed to just keep going. They're still not going to bother you, but don't bother them. It says, and all the inhabitants of Canaan will melt away. So on the west side of the Jordan, they hadn't seen this. On the east side of the Jordan, they saw the people march through. We're so triumphant. Get up to the mountain and go, uh-oh, be scared, and come back down. And like, oh, no, I thought you guys were going back to where you came from. On the west side of the Jordan, they don't see any of this. As far as they know, they're just on the other side killing people. They heard about what happened to the Egyptians. They heard about, and they think, oh my God, these people, they're over there doing all sorts of stuff, because we will make up stuff in our heads, right? So in Joshua chapter 2, verse 9, now we're talking about the people on the west side of the Jordan, because the song says, all the inhabitants of Canaan will just melt away. Well, Jordan chapter 2, verse 9, now that they're finally coming back over after 40 years, and they don't know what they've been doing over there for 40 years, but we know you killed the Egyptians. He says to the men, so they remember how they spied out Jericho? That's what the first city they saw once they crossed over. They spy out Jericho, they run to Rahab the harlot, and she tells them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, Canaan. We've been waiting for it. That the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who are on the other side of the Jordan. So we even heard about that. So as far as they don't know that they were just screwing around for 40 years. As far as they know, you conquered this king and you conquered that. We heard what you did to them. Well, for 38 years, they didn't do nothing. Okay. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who are on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. We heard about that. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you, for the Lord your God. For he is the God in heaven above and on the earth beneath. I mean, your God is the God. And so Rahab is saying, we know all the stories. Well, half of them made up, because had they been watching them on the other side of the Jordan, they would have saw the children of Israel were just wandering around for 38 years. In the last couple of years, they had a victory, and God gave them victories, and they came on over. So God recreated those circumstances. So they didn't mess up God's plan, because God wanted them to, but it just could have happened 40 years sooner, but it wasn't messed up, right? So they were supposed to defeat Pharaoh and then come on over and everybody would be scared of them. Well, they defeated Pharaoh. God gave them a couple more victories. So when they came over, people were still afraid. In Joshua chapter 5, verse 1, it says, so as was when the kings of the Amorites who are on the west side. So the Ammonites, those are also Lot's kids. And then the Amorites, those are the Canaanites. Ammonites, not Canaanites. Amorites, they're Canaanites. They have to be destroyed. So it was when all the kings of the Amorites who were on the west side of the Jordan, not these, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Israel until we crossed over, that their hearts melted and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the children of Israel. So he dried up the Red Sea, and for 40 years they were doing something, and now he's dried up the Jordan, and now they're coming across. So they're all scared of them. Which, if we do stuff God's way, he clears our enemies out of the pathway. So they're finally doing what God asked them to do, and he's clearing people off. And he dried up the Jordan too. This God is incredible. Joshua chapter 9, verse 3 says, but when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, because now they've come over and they've started getting people on the west side of the Jordan, right? So the inhabitants of Gibeon said, we're not going to let them conquer us. We're not stupid. It says they worked craftily and went and pretended to be ambassadors from some far off company. And they took old sacks on their donkeys and old wineskins, torn and mended. Like, let's just find some old stuff so it looked like we've been traveling for weeks, even though we're just about, 5 miles from here. Old and patched sandals on their feet and old garments on themselves, and all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy. And they went to Joshua and to the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, we have come from a far country. Now, therefore, make a covenant with us. Because everybody's scared of them. Because God took care of his plan. You can't mess up God's plan. They delayed it 40 years, but they didn't mess it up. God didn't go, oh, no, now what am I going to do? So when they finally came over, people are scared of them. One people, they're pretending like they're from some far. We're not Canaanites because we know you're going to come over and kill all the Canaanites. We ain't Canaanites. Make a covenant with us. So, of course, they're dumb, and they did. And they made a covenant with them. And then they couldn't break their covenant. So those people stayed with the Israelites for hundreds of years. And were kind of a thorn in their side. Okay, so everything God says through Moses through the song happens. It just happens 40 years later than it should have. Getting back to the song, verse 16. Fear and dread will fall on them. Yeah, it did 40 years later. And again, the timing of God. This sermon's about the timing of God. Sometimes, I mean, it's okay because some people preach, well, you missed God and that's too bad. It's like, no, you did not mess up God's plan. Even though it was 40 years later, God's plan still worked. So we don't have to regret that life. And what if I had made this choice early? What if God knew what you were going to do. God knew what we were going to do. So he's prepared for it. But the plan didn't change. God doesn't change the plan, doesn't change the destination. Like I was telling a friend of mine, he programmed your GPS in the morning with the destination. And you can take all the wrong turns and it will still say, and turn left at the next corner. Because you still have to get back to where he doesn't change. God doesn't go, oh, well, I'll just give you a whole new plan. It's like, I knew what you were going to do. Moses, I knew you were going to try to kill that Egyptian. I knew that you were going to kill that Egyptian. I knew you were going to hide out in the wilderness for 40 years. And now that you got it all out, I'm going to meet you within the burning bush and send you back to Egypt. Because I told Jonah, I sent you to Nineveh, and I know you went the opposite direction. Guess what? I created a storm. I prepared a fish, swallowed you up, swam to Nineveh. He spit you out on the beach of Nineveh. And, oh, look, you still ended up doing what I told you to do. Peter, you know how you denied me and hid and you denied Jesus 3 times, and you still have to do it. I'm still showing up in Galilee and saying, hey, feed my sheep. Didn't change my plans. So this idea that you missed God and now God, you're living in God's plan B. No. God knows what we're going to do. The timing may be different, but the results are the same. God wants us to know the timing because he wants us to be aware you missed it. Otherwise, we never learn. So we need to know there was a different timing, but never there was a different plan. Does that make sense? Yes, because we need to know. Otherwise, we think we can just do anything and it's okay. No, that's not the idea. I can just do anything. I can never mess up God. Well, guess what? God has this interesting plan for the guy who thinks he can do anything. That's not the idea. God has a destination for us. He wants us to know you could have done it then, but you didn't mess me up. You still end up where I told you, and I'll recreate those circumstances, and you're still going to end up doing what I asked you to do. It's cool. So, fear and dread will fall on them. Well, it did 40 years later. By the greatness of your arm, they will be as still as a stone till your people pass over. That happened with Edom. That happened with Moab. They just kept still as they finally went in 40 years later. O Lord, till the people pass over whom you purchased. You will bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, which he did, in the place, O Lord, which you have made for your own dwelling. Now that mountain is where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, right? That mountain eventually became, that's Mount Moriah, that area. The temple was eventually built there, and God uh, brought them and planted them there in Jerusalem. So guess what? God's not telling us stuff hoping it will happen. He's telling us what he's going to do. Let me go down and tell Abraham what I'm going to do to Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, if there's 40 people righteous, you're not doing it. Yeah, I won't do it if there's 40 righteous. If there's 30 righteous, if there's 20, if there's 10, yeah, if there's 10 righteous people that you can get, yeah, I won't do it. But guess what? I already know there's not 10 righteous people because I didn't come to you and say, here's the thing I'm hoping to do. I came and said, here's the thing I'm planning on doing. You're trying to change me, but okay, good luck with that. So God, His will is done. That's what I don't see the stories in the Bible where someone said, "Oh, God had this whole other plan and I changed it." Elijah ran from what's that woman's name? Hephzibah. Who? What's her name? Jezebel. God meets him in the mountain. What are you doing here? Well, I'm go back. She crazy. You know how she be? Go back. So he had to go back. So you have to finish. We have to finish the thing that God put in our heart to do. He doesn't change it. That's why it's stuff will stay on us and just stay on us. And we keep telling that person, "Aren't you supposed to be doing this? Aren't you supposed to be doing this? Aren't you supposed to be doing that?" Because God's plan hadn't changed. God didn't change His plan. He's just waiting for you to give in and do it. Okay, you will bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance. So they eventually got to where God told them to go. In the place, O Lord, which you have made for your own dwelling, the sanctuary, O Lord, which you have made, which your hands have established. The Lord shall reign forever and ever, for the horses of Pharaoh went with his chariots and his horsemen into the sea, and the Lord brought back the waters of the sea upon them. So even that, Pharaoh can come after you. You can be trapped in the mountains and Red Sea. God will vanquish your enemies. God cannot be stopped. That's the good news. We don't live in a world where sometimes the devil wins, sometimes God wins. God always wins. And things can look bad, and guess what? God still wins in the end. So we just need to calm down, stop being so angry. Why did that happen? Ah! Well, God let it happen, obviously. But He's got a plan. God hasn't gone anywhere. God's not on the toilet. He's good. He's taking care of it. But the children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea. Then Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took the timbrel in her hand. Just want to park there for a second. Miriam the prophetess. This is actually the first prophet mentioned in the Bible was Miriam. So this woman prophetess, she grabs a timbrel and says, "Oh, my brother just sang a song. Let me sing it. I'll join in the chorus." And she took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances, and Miriam answered them. And by the way, God did not say, separate the women and they must be on the left and the men must be on the right. That was their culture. That's what they believed. And God says, well, I ain't got time to correct all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and anoint this woman, and she's a prophetess, and you can see that women have value. Your culture thinks that they don't, but they do. So this separation was man-made. But anyway, Miriam takes off the women because they made the women sit over there. Okay, God anoints her. And then they sing to the Lord, for He has triumphed gloriously. The horse and the rider He has thrown into the sea. And she finishes her song. She sings the chorus back to Him. And there is Exodus chapter 15. All the things that God are going to do, God is going to do, which He planned to do He wants them to know that He had planned to do it. He knew it would take 40 years before it happened. But He wants them to know, this is what I've got for you if you just go do it. He knew that they weren't. 40 years later, it all still happened. Because God knew it would take 40 years. But God's trying to teach them, you don't have to wait. You don't have to be afraid. Once they finally went in, they started conquering those places. They conquered Jericho. Because they had learned by that 40 year in the wilderness, you don't have to wait. If God says it, He's going to do it. And sometimes God has us wandering around the wilderness to teach us a lesson. So that when we're finally ready to do the thing that He wants us to do, we'll just move on it. We'll trust that God knows what He's doing. Okay, so the timing of God means that we sometimes can delay our own blessing, but we can't prevent it. God's still going to do what He's going to do in our lives. Okay, thanks so much, Roger and Donna, and hey, Julie.
And all you guys who comment, it helps me just know the that it's still running. Because sometimes I'm nervous, like, am I just talking to this fan, or is there actually people listening in? So thank you so much, those of you. But those of you who don't comment, that's fine too. I'm not saying I want more comments. I'm just grateful when these people do comment. It helps me. Okay, Ron, you stupid. All right. So I will on Wednesday we are going over. Yes, thank you, Jan. So on Wednesday we're in the book of John, and next Sunday we'll be going to Exodus chapter 16. Thank you again so much for listening in. All right, bye bye. Wait, I pushed end, but now.